You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Bitcoin, Ether, Ripple, Litecoin, and more. Cryptocurrencies and other digital assets are taking the financial world by storm. This exploding market provides everything a savvy trader needs: volatility, volume, and liquidity. Provided you know how to find it. That's where we come in. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown. Each week, we'll break down the latest trading activity, trends, and developments on everything from coins to tokens, futures, and even OTC options. If it's moving the crypto markets, then you'll find it on the Crypto Rundown. Now it's time to dive into the exploding world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's time for the Crypto Rundown.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Crypto Rundown, the program where we break down what the heck's going on in the crypto world, all the crypto options, the futures, the skew, the volatility, some of the spot, all that good stuff as well. My name is Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, as well as, of course, from the ever-exciting, ever-growing these days Options Insider Radio Network. It's usually growing, but these days it's growing quite a bit. You guys are discovering it, not just for this program, but all the other fun programs we do there. If you just listen to this show, make sure you head on out, check out the full network. You can find that pretty much wherever you find this fine program, or just go to our website. It's all there too, our mobile app. Just type Options Insider Radio, and you'll get all of that good stuff and a whole lot more. We'll keep you busy, keep you informed, keep you educated here throughout these mad times in the marketplace. And, of course, you guys keep us informed as well. Keep those questions, those comments coming. We do love to hear from you guys. We just celebrated our 900th episode spectacular on the option block earlier today. Featured a whole bunch of you. We'll see if we can squeeze a few more of you guys on here for all things crypto. But joining me on the program today, we got a great guest. So let's get to it. Let's open up the crypto hot seat.
Forget about cold storage. It's time to turn up the heat on thought leaders from the world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's time to take their place on the Crypto Hot Seat.
All right, everybody, welcome to the most uncomfortable, the most difficult, the most dangerous place in the crypto markets. Yes, it is time for the Crypto Hot Seat, the portion of the show where we bring on guests from throughout the world of crypto derivatives and indeed beyond to proceed to pick their brains for the benefit of you, the listener. Now that I've got him nervous, let me welcome on our guest. He's a first-timer here on the program and indeed on the network, Mr. Greg Magadini. He's the co-founder over there at Genesis Volatility. Greg, welcome to the Crypto Rundown program.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Happy to be here.
And Greg, as we are wont to do with all of our first-timers here on the network, why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of an overview of your background in the crypto and indeed the derivative space, as well as what the heck it is you guys do at Genesis Volatility.
Yeah, absolutely. So starting with kind of my background, my name is Greg Magadini. I'm one of the co-founders over at Genesis Volatility. My background is in prop trading. I got started over at S&B Capital over in New York City, then went full-time here at Chopper Trading here in Chicago, spent some time at DRW, and most recently worked at a blockchain analytics company heading their trading over there called FRST. I got about a little over 10 years of experience trading options, and I've been in the blockchain space since 2013. My two business partners, Daniel Durante and Pat Doyle, both come from the tech background. They are both full-stack developers. They've been in blockchain for about 5 years each, and they both have experience coding smart contracts. We launched Genesis Volatility back in January of 2020. And basically what Genesis Volatility is a deep dive analytics platform into crypto options. So we have both current data as well as historical data all the way back to 2016. We have all sorts of different charts, skew charts, term structures, different analytics around historical vol versus implied vol, as well as some tools to analyze, volatility cones and different altcoins from a volatility perspective. And we're also incorporating some of the DeFi options. Those are the decentralized options living on the blockchain. We're incorporating those data points into our platform as well.
I like it. You're speaking my language, sir. Volatility cones for crypto. I like to sink my teeth into all that good stuff. But before we do that, like a lot of our guests who come from the world of options and indeed more traditional finance as opposed to crypto and Bitcoin, I'm always curious, what was that moment? What was that inflection point? What was that moment where they lured you to the dark side of crypto? You said, those things are kind of interesting, and maybe I want to learn more about them. What was that moment for you there, Greg?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually in college back in 2011, I started learning about crypto, and I wrote a paper on it for my senior project. And I don't know if you spent much time on the dark web, but that was the first time I ever went on the dark web. And I was actually pretty freaked out. I thought this was pretty nefarious. It was going to get shut down by the government any second, and I was not a believer back then. And it wasn't until about 2013 that I saw that Bitcoin was still around, and it finally broke its new highs. At the time, the high was $200. And from a technical perspective, like a technical analysis perspective, I thought, okay, this definitely has a leg higher. And so that's when I first started taking some bites and getting invested into Bitcoin. And that's when I thought it could be here for a while.
Interesting. I've heard a lot of different explanations for why people dip their toes into it. Usually it's something to do with the price action over recent years, something else along those lines. It's the first time I've had someone come to me, Greg, and say it was the dark web that lured them to the dark side. So hats off to you, sir, for having a new origin story, if you will.
That's funny. Love it.
And I have a little birdie told me you do know one of our regular contributors on this network, the Greasy Meatball, a.k.a. Mr. Mark Sebastian from Option Pit. Is that the case, sir?
That is the case, yes. Absolutely. Big fan of Mr. Meatball.
I won't hold that against you. Don't worry. But yes, he does contribute every now and then, including he was just on our 900th episode. Spectacular. But you touched on kind of some of the analytics and things you have. Let's do a little bit of a deep dive in there. So obviously, we like a little bit of analytics here for crypto on this show. In fact, we do a lot with our friends over there at skew.com to break down a lot of the analytics. Maybe we'll have to start mixing that up and start looking at Genesis out there right now. Walk us through the platform a little bit. Is it live right now? What can users see? What can they do if they head on over to Genesis Volatility right now?
Yeah, so everything that's public right now, we have a newsletter, we have our Twitter. Our actual product is still in beta, so we have about 60 firms who are users, a few of the big firms who are using our beta. We're going to be launching additional beta with Paradigm, and so some of their users can hop onto our platform, but we're not going to go live for about another 2 months from now. And so until then, it's kind of all behind a wall, unfortunately.
I don't know if you heard, Greg, but there's a little thing called the Bitcoin halving going on right now. People might want to check out some volatility. You didn't want to line up with this at all?
Well, I am honored that we're talking about halving because it's happening right now. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's literally happening in the next 10 minutes or so. So that's pretty exciting. But as far as launching before the halving, we weren't quite there yet. We still have some user feedback that we're incorporating into our platform before it's fully live.
And you mentioned kind of some of the early users are firms. Is that the core audience for this product? Is going to be on the institutional side, or do you plan to have some of the active retail in there as well?
Yep, our platform's going to be for everyone. And as of right now, the firms are just kind of the first people who kind of signed up for a beta and wanted to check it out and to give us some feedback. But it's going to be for everyone. And
where are you pulling all of this data from? Because obviously there's different sources. We looked a lot at Deribit. They're one of the big platforms. I know Skew pulls a lot of their analytics, particularly for things like the Skew and the volatility and the open interest from those platforms, as well as some of the other ones. Where are you guys pulling your data from?
Yep. So Deribit's going to be the main source of it. We're incorporating CME as well. And so those are going to be the two main data sources, especially because Paradigm's doing a lot of block trading on both those platforms. And then we're pulling the rest of the data directly from the blockchain for all the DeFi options.
Let's get into those for our listeners who aren't maybe familiar with what you're talking about there. What are you talking about when you're saying DeFi options?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So there's a lot of options, or there's a new movement called decentralized finance that mostly lives on the Ethereum blockchain. And there's about 3 groups creating protocols to have options that live directly on the Ethereum blockchain. And so basically what these options are fully funded, American-style, physically settled options. And they just launched in about March of this year. And so it's still kind of a small market, but it's about $2 million of collateral locked up into those options. And that's something that we find really interesting. We're trying to support some of these on-chain options to see what can happen there. And there's some pretty interesting opportunities, especially with kind of the price activity we saw over the weekend, where some of these options are kind of slow to react. We saw some of these options trading at 0 implied vol, stuff like that. So there's a little bit of opportunity there, although it's on the smaller size right now. But we think in the future it could be something really interesting.
Yeah, I was going to say, it must be hard to pull data from that on a regular basis because you only can update it when there are prints and when there are trades. And obviously for some of those less centralized type products, I mean, it's already hard enough on some of the larger venues. Look at CME, for example. They're having struggles getting regular volume. Now you're going out to something that's decentralized out there. It's got to be challenging to be able to update those analytics on a regular basis, Greg, given the fact that those products aren't really trading on a regular basis.
Yeah. So there's 2 ways to do it. We can look at the actual trade prints, and then we can also look at just kind of the state of where everything's priced at. So we pull the pricing data pretty frequently, and we just take a snapshot of it, and we can see how those are priced at the time, whether it's a trade or not.
And we were just talking earlier, there's some other platforms out there like Skew and others. So there's a few players in the crypto and indeed the derivatives analytics space right now. What was it that made you guys think, you know what, this is missing, this component is missing, this is what we're bringing to the table that's unique and different? What made you guys want to dive into the crypto analytics race now, Greg?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's kind of 2 avenues. We think that the crypto option space is going to grow a lot. So year over year from Q1 2020 versus Q1 2019, the volume has grown about 450% across all the various exchanges. And as far as what our offering is that we have customizable analytics. So whereas maybe some of our competitors are more static and are kind of showing us what's going on right now or how the market's priced right now, what we have is historical data that can go way back, and then you could customize it and really filter down different trades or implied volatilities or different ratios that you're looking for. And so we wanted to go very, very deep into the analytics side of specifically just the crypto options.
So you want to be a hardcore deep dive for the crypto options trader out there, which, hey, that's music to our ears. That's why we're on this program, talking about all that fun stuff. Now, you mentioned Paradigm. Is the plan going forward to kind of keep this as a standalone platform that users come in and they license directly, or is it more the plan to maybe partner with some of the large brokers / exchanges out there like a Coinbase and others and have them license it from you and then their users get access to the platform? What's the goal going forward?
So the goal going forward is a subscription model, sort of like live vol in the traditional markets. We would be the live vol of the crypto options market. So no execution, just pure analytics and subscription fee for that.
So live vol. So you want to get bought up by the SIBO as well, like all the other pretty much players in the analytics space these days. Everyone wants to be part of the ongoing and growing SIBO empire. Well, maybe when they relist their future over there someday, they could acquire you guys next out there. But you kind of mentioned Halving. We're going to get into all that in a second in the Bitcoin breakdown. But I'm curious for you, as you've been watching the analytics swing and move about over this past week as we're approaching the seminal event, which, as you mentioned, is happening pretty much any minute now. Anything really stand out to you from an overall analytics perspective? Anything that's really surprising you as we're seeing this kind of pop off the charts here?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of some opportunities we see in the Bitcoin vol space as well as the Ethereum vol space, and they're kind of 2 different opportunities. For the Bitcoin vol space, we view the driving factors for Bitcoin to be more of the macro side, so more macro fundamentals driving Bitcoin. And so viewing that perspective, we think that the volatility dynamics of Bitcoin are going to be pretty similar to some of the volatility dynamics of gold. So what we saw last year and most recently was that volatility got a bid in gold when gold rallied. So we had a rally in gold last summer. We just had a rally in gold pretty recently, and we saw volatility going up with that. So something that was interesting is that back in March, we saw volatility come into the crypto space, but this was downside volatility. So the vol got bid when the crypto markets got hammered, and Bitcoin, actually went sub 5. And so some of these shifts in the skews really got to the put side, whereas historically the skews were pretty much to the call side, especially for the long dated options. So there's some opportunity there that we think could be really interesting. In the medium to short term, we think some of the risk reversal positions in Bitcoin options could be interesting opportunities, especially with the dynamics of swaps and futures being paid out in the underlying Bitcoin. So that creates kind of an interesting hedging scenario. So if you think about being short one Bitcoin future at 10,000 on, say, Deribit, well, if Bitcoin goes down to 5,000, all of a sudden you're short 2 Bitcoin futures. Or if Bitcoin goes up to 20,000, you're short half of a Bitcoin future. So kind of that delta rebalancing happens naturally, which works really well with a risk reversal where you're short to put and long to call. And so we think that the combined effects of the relationship of vol should be coming in on a Bitcoin rally if the macros are similar to gold macros. The fact that the skew right now is really bid to the put side, and the fact that you can delta hedge with an underlying with a future that's paid out in the underlying. So that creates a pretty interesting scenario, we think, in the Bitcoin option space. And then on the ETH option space, just some pretty cool stuff happening there too. So I don't know if your listeners know this, but there's going to be a migration from ETH 1.0 to ETH 2.0. And the way that that's going to happen is that we're going to launch the beacon chain sometime later this year. It's supposed to be no earlier than July 30th and no later than the end of the year. And basically what the beacon chain is a smart contract where you can send your ETH 1.0 and you get in return some ETH 2.0. And so however those dynamics work, when they launch the beacon chain, if it's super successful and we migrate from proof of work to proof of stake, and the first phase of scalability solutions happens for Ethereum, we think that could be a very bullish catalyst for Ethereum. Or on the flip side, if something tragic happens and the beacon chain kind of flops, you send your funds, they get frozen, you don't have access to them anymore, and there's a bug in the code, we think that could be a kind of a negative vol shock to Ethereum. And the way that the term structure is priced right now is when you look at June options, those are priced at the same vol as September and December options. So we think there's an opportunity there to do some calendar spreads, long calendars, or long diagonals in order to sort of capture that vol event, which we think is not being really priced into the ETH options right now.
I like that. A lot to unpack there, Greg. Let's start. You kind of touched on a somewhat sensitive point for a lot of our listeners, which is the correlation. In fact, you said that you think looking to gold volatility dynamics, that could give you some insight into what to expect for Bitcoin going forward, which is kind of interesting. I know for a lot of our guests of late, particularly in the height of the madness back in March, getting into early April, where we saw everything, not just crypto, but like you mentioned, gold and crude and just about everything else, they were all moving with a correlation that moved effectively to one. People had to liquidate, people had to get to cash, and they were selling everything they had. Didn't matter if it was equities, if it was crude oil, if it was gold, and if it was Bitcoin. We saw a huge correlation at that point. A lot of our guests were very disappointed in that. In fact, we kind of have jokingly, well, maybe only have jokingly referred to that on this show as kind of the great disappointment, because so many of our guests were upset about that. They kind of came into this space looking for a product that at the very least was uncorrelated, and yet they saw it moving like anything but when everything really counted. When that correlation really mattered, Bitcoin moved in lockstep with everything else. I'm curious, was that as much of a surprise to you, Greg, as it was to the rest of our guests, or do you maybe not share that outlook that was the quote-unquote great disappointment of Bitcoin, sir?
Yeah, I think I don't necessarily share that outlook. I think it's not that much of a surprise. Here's how I think about it. Everyone has debt denominated in fiat. Everyone has bills to pay denominated in fiat. And so when there's kind of an economic contraction and you lose your income stream, you lose your job, and you're unsure about your job going forward, and you're not sure how you're going to pay the bills, there's kind of this tendency to liquidate everything and get cash in your bank account to keep financing your bills and your rent and your mortgage and stuff like that. So we actually saw that across the board: sell stocks, even sell bonds at first was the initial reaction. Sell gold was the initial reaction. Sell crypto is the initial reaction. So to me, that kind of makes sense. Sell anything to raise some cash and have some funds to pay for bills and stuff like that. So in the short term, I think that's just kind of a natural panic response or uncertainty response, get liquid. But I think in the long term, we'll see the dynamics of crypto actually thrive in this environment, both from a kind of monetary fiscal response that the coronavirus is causing, as well as a property that crypto has uniquely, which is perfect portability, meaning I can take my funds and go anywhere in the world without anyone really knowing. And you can't really do that with any other asset class, whether it's cash or stocks or bonds or real estate. If you live in a country where the government doesn't want you to leave the country with your assets, there's not much you can do. Crypto, you just got to remember your private key, and you can go anywhere you want in the world, and you don't lose any liquidity. So if I was going to say, take my assets with me in the form of like an expensive necklace or something like that, like a $10 million necklace that no one knows that's worth $10 million, and then I hop on a plane and I go to a different country, I lose a lot of liquidity there, because when I want to sell that $10 million necklace, I'm not sure I can sell it for $10 million. Maybe I sell it for 7 or 6 or some sort of loss of liquidity there. Bitcoin doesn't have that property. So Bitcoin, you can go wherever you want, and you keep all your liquidity with you as well. So we think that kind of the uncertainty politically can benefit Bitcoin on a fundamental level, and also the monetary and fiscal response can benefit Bitcoin on a macro level.
Well, it's time to benefit our audience, because it's time to dive into that maelstrom that is the halving. Yes, it is time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
It's time to explore the latest trading activity, trends, and developments across the world's leading crypto market. It's time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
All right, everybody, let's get to it. Time for the Bitcoin Breakdown, the portion of the show where we break down what the heck is going on in the world's leading crypto asset, a.k.a. good old Bitcoin. And it's kind of moving all over the place right now, as you might imagine, because that day we've been talking about I forgot how long, for quite some time now here on the program is finally upon us. It is actually happening as we are recording the show right now, listening. So the great halving, of course, the moment where they're reducing the rewards for the miners out there. So, of course, going to effectively reduce the supply if all the economics goes as planned, and therefore, usually leading up to this event, it has proven to be pretty bullish in other major cryptocurrencies like Litecoin and others. They saw tremendous rallies leading into the halving. Coming out of it, not so much. So that's an interesting debate. We're going to get to that in a little bit. Looking at the price action right now, it has been swinging kind of wildly coming into the show. It was off quite a bit, and then it has kind of regained some of it. Last week, we ended the show. It was a little bit shy of 8,900 listeners Bitcoin. It was about 8,871, and coming into the show right now, we're seeing at around about 85 and a half. So that puts it down about 240 odd handles from last show. But again, wait 5 minutes in the crypto space, and Bitcoin could be moving somewhere else. But of course, we're in this big will they, won't they dance right now. It's kind of what everyone is fixated on. Not so much what the price action will be going into the halving, because I think we kind of already have a handle on that. It's really what will it be coming out of that. There's a lot of different cases, places, a lot of articles out there debating what the movement's going to be coming out of it, what the data is showing us. We'll get to some of the skew and everything else out there in a little bit. I'm sure Greg probably has his own thoughts on that. I'd like to hear that as well. But we're seeing, again, a lot of volatility. Last week we saw Bitcoin kind of trying to have a hard time to break through that 9,000 level and maintain it. Couldn't really do it coming into this week, at least today's show. Again, not so much. So we're under that key 10,000 level, which I think a lot of folks maybe hoped Bitcoin would get north of leading into the halving. So maybe that alone is a little bit bearish right there in and of that self. Again, look at all the people break down different technical levels. We've had the cryptopatterns.net guys out here. If it keeps dropping as is right now, people are looking at maybe 8,100 as another key support level around those areas. But there are effectively a lot of different scenarios people are breaking down right now, looking at the different trend lines. Above 14,000 is seen as a pretty clear level if it can get north of where it is right now. If you're looking to the upside, then 14,000 seems to be, of course, a level a lot of people are focused. We still have a long way to get there, let alone almost 20,000 level that it threatened back in 2017. But 14,000 has been a key level. It peaked there in June of 2019 as well. So if it's going, and every time it got close to that, it really seemed to meet a lot of firm selling pressure at that level. So if it can, of course, get there, which is a big if in and of itself, that'll be kind of the next major test that folks are looking for out there. Of course, we even have folks out there talking it up. We don't normally talk crypto. That's what the halving does. It brings everyone to the party. Like Paul Tudor Jones saying, it's only 11 years old, this asset out here, so it's still in the early phases. He said, when it comes to trustworthiness, Bitcoin is 11 years old, so there's very little trust in it. We are watching the birth of a store of value. Whether that succeeds or not, only time will tell. What I do know is that every day that goes by and Bitcoin survives, the trust in it will go up. It's a pretty low barometer. If it survives, I will trust it. So far, it has survived, so I guess he trusts it. Some firms that track this stuff, like Grayscale and others, reporting nearly $400 million in what they term institutional investments pouring into Bitcoin in the first quarter here. So that at least supports that maybe bullish mentality, that maybe what people have been waiting for, the large-scale institutions, maybe starting to flock into that, of course, in the near term. I mentioned 8,100. If you're looking on the bearish side to the downside, a lot of other folks looking at the mid-6,000s as beyond that, a key critical level that we've seen some support at in the past. So if we can break through 8,100, then around that 6,500, some people say 6,600, some say 6,400. Somewhere around that 6,500 level is where a lot of folks have seen it kind of consolidate in the past. Q3 of 2019, it kind of bounced off that 6,410 level and kind of hung out in that range for a little bit. So that's another key technical level beyond which, if it can break through the 8,100, which is the first one, then around that 6,500 level seems to be another one into that. Of course, if it does pull back, then maybe that provides a little bit of stability going forward. It has been a little bit volatile of late. Speaking of volatility, actually, before we get to that, we asked you guys this question as well. I want to check it up again later on in the show when we get to your questions, but we put it out right before the showtime. Wanted to get the pulse of what you guys are feeling. We said, the big halving, the great day everyone's been waiting for, it is finally upon us. What do you guys think this means for the future? Are you bullish Bitcoin going forward, or are you bearish Bitcoin going forward? You got a little bit of time left in this one, so it just went live before the show, so it's still early days here. But in the early voting here, it seems like our audience is pretty split, actually. We're about almost 54% for higher, a.k.a. bullish, and 46% saying lower, a.k.a. bearish. So that's pretty darn close to 50-50, which I guess is what makes a pretty good market, which is probably why Bitcoin is bouncing around a little bit here. Before I start breaking down some of the analytics over here, I'm curious, Greg, what are your thoughts on this overall halving event, and how would you like to vote in our poll if you would like to, sir? Are you feeling a little bit higher in the near term, or are you feeling lower as a result of the halving?
Yeah, so let's see here. I think I have different answers for different time frames. So I would say in the near term, I'm sort of agnostic. I don't think there's really a big impact in the near term. The reason why I say that is because if you look at the last halving, we went from a block reward of 25 Bitcoin down to 12.5 Bitcoin. And at the time, Bitcoin was about $1,000. So the dollar value of the Bitcoin production was about $12,500. And now we've gone from 12.5 down to 6.25. And around current prices, the Bitcoin produced in dollar terms is about $50,000 less per 10-minute block. But if you look at the daily volume for the markets back in 2016, we were looking at about $50 million worth of Bitcoin volume. And now we're at about $50 billion worth, which includes some of these futures and these derivatives and so on and so forth. So because there's a lot of trading vehicles and people doing a lot of short-term trading on Bitcoin, we think that the impact of a reduction in supply has very little effect in the short term. I would call sort of day traders as a directionless or trendless liquidity pool because, when day traders buy, they later sell. Same thing with swing traders. But things that create trends are long-term buying and holding. So I think over the long term, I think it's bullish. So the loss in supply could also be viewed as someone buying and holding 50 grand worth of Bitcoin every 10 minutes. So it takes a while for kind of that build up to happen. So we think that in the short term, very little effect. In the long term, it's going to be bullish. It'll create a drift upward.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to argue with the long-term fundamental economics of it, right? There's less supply, at least theoretically, there should be less supply on the market. So if demand remains the same, we should see a certain swing. But again, we've seen that play out. So if you have an expected pattern in the market, sometimes the market likes to take advantage of that and fade that, which is also kind of interesting. Speaking of interesting, let's talk about the analytics right now. These are coming at us courtesy of our friends over there in SKUland. Maybe Greg has his own analytics he wants to throw in there from his Genesis platform. I'll let him have at it in a minute here. Let's look at the realized vol out there right now. 1 month realized is pretty much unched, right around 79%. 1 year also pretty much unched, right around 90%. We're seeing enough volatility to kind of merit this 90% level on the year and about almost 80% on the last month. That's kind of been the case for a while now. It's moving enough to keep this going. So we haven't seen maybe the explosion of vol that maybe some expected leading into the halving. Well, we'll get to that maybe a little bit different when we get to the implied space. Remember, the implied, listeners, is the level of volatility that the options are actually pricing in. So that's what's actually trading. Realize is what the market has actually shown us historically, and then implied is what the market is pricing in going forward. If you look at that from that frame of reference, it is higher. We're up from about a 78% last week on the implied out to about 102% this week. So that, of course, is higher, and that's probably to be expected given the fact that we're seeing this major event risk playing out in the markets right now. It's analogous to if you're trading an option on an equity like an Apple or a Tesla. When they have earnings events, those are big volatility events. You're going to see that volatility build up into the event and maybe come off precipitously after the event. It'll be interesting to see what happens to Bitcoin vol next week, or if we see a lot of movement post-halving, that vol could stay up here next week. So that'll be an interesting question. Let's look out on the volume front right now. And as you might imagine, it's been a pretty active week out there on Deribit in particular. That's, of course, still the number one platform out there. You saw a big peak on the 7th of May since our last show there with about 189 million worth of notional going up, followed on the 8th by 170 million, and on the 10th with about 149 million. So far, not a ton today, about a little over 100 million on the platform today, which is kind of surprising given today is the day. Today is the halving day. You'd think maybe today would be off the charts, but so far at least, not so much. In terms of what the big prints were over the course of the past week, let's break it down here a little bit. On the 8th of May, we saw a 500 lot of the June 7,000 puts going up. Again, we don't have a side on this, but it was done right when Bitcoin was a little bit shy of 10,000, about 98.85. It went up for 0.031 Bitcoin. So I'll let you do that math for yourselves over there as we keep on rolling on out. Also saw about 800 of the May 7,500 puts. So downside puts, at least from the size print, seem to be the order of the day. These went up on the 9th in consecutive 200 lot blocks, so a total of 800. They were done when Bitcoin was right around 86.50 or so, and the price was about 0.0275 to 0.0270. They did it on little splits there. Again, we don't have a side on those, but again, 800 lot on the 7,500 puts and a 500 lot of the 7,000 puts. So a lot of downside lighting up the tape out there. It's probably going to be reflected in our skew when we get to that in a little bit. And looks like it is, yeah. Let's see. Bitcoin skew has grown in the positive direction, which means puts are getting a little bit juicier out there, getting a little bit more interest. It was about 5.33% last show. Now it's up to 13%. So again, how the skew folks like to quote their skew out there. Positive skew means a little bit more interest in the puts out there. And that's exactly what we're seeing out there. And coming into today's action right now, I said kind of light out there right now. And Greg, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this as well. But right now, as of this moment, the big prints out in Deribit were the May 7,000 puts. They were going up. Looks like, again, a total of nearly 1,000. So that was the contract we saw going up earlier this week. You saw it go up on the 8th. So maybe someone taking those off. Greg, I know you're watching a lot of volume out there on Deribit and other platforms as well. Anything catching your eye either today or this week as we're heading on into the big halving, sir?
Yeah, so looking today, it looks like someone bought the biggest dollar size print was someone bought some of these May 12th $9,000 calls, about 100 of those. paid about 111 implied vol for that. So that seems kind of interesting, kind of on the higher side of the vol. Looking at the term structure right now, it's in super backwardation basically from over the weekend. We got that implied vol curve completely flipped from contango to backwardated. So that's something interesting. And then as far as some of the skews go, on May 29th expiration, we have a really puts are really bid. So we think there's some interesting opportunity there. Again, with kind of a potential risk reversal, delta neutral sort of strategy.
Is that something you're seeing clients and end users come to you for and saying, hey, like you mentioned, the skew is bid. I mentioned this up from last show. Are they starting to look at you and saying, hey, can we price up some risk reversals here? Are you starting seeing interest in that strategy out there, Greg?
As far as pricing things, we're not doing any of the execution. So I mostly just talk with clients and tell them some of my opinions on the market. They tell me some of their opinions. But yeah, we definitely think that there's some interest there on this kind of dynamic, especially because for a long time, the skew of the crypto options, the Bitcoin options, were really to the call side. So calls were really bid over puts, especially for the long dated ones. And we think that's kind of a dynamic that was born in 2017, 2018, where the rally in 2017 was a pretty volatile one, and the bear market in 2018 kind of floated down. And so skews kind of reflected that for a long time. And so the fact that recently, especially because of this March sell-off, all that has flipped, we think, there's some interest there. There's some opportunity there.
Let's look at some opportunity for some of the platforms here. Open interest, actually off a little bit since our last show, which is kind of interesting. You think you might see a little bit of a groundswell of more OI building into the halving, but maybe some folks deciding they don't want to have the event risk, the event exposure, taking it off as we're heading into the halving, which is pretty much any minute now here, listeners. Coming into Showtime, we saw the number one venue, still Deribit. It's got about 87% of the overall open interest out there right now, up to 783 million worth of notional open on Deribit, which is extremely high. They're averaging about 625 million. That's still off the highs, which was recently, which was nearly $1 billion, 954 million. That was right around the time of our last show. So the numbers getting pretty strong. So even though they're low, they're still well off. We were talking 300, 400 million in OI not too long ago out there. So this marks a substantial increase from even a few months ago, or even a month ago out here. It was well shy of 600 million back in mid-April or so. So yeah, a lot of growth in OI, even though it's down over the course of the past week. Also seeing an interesting dance out here for the number 2 spot. I mentioned it before here on the show, kind of a bit of a fight here between OKEX and LedgerX. OKEX has about 57 million worth of notional, and number 3, LedgerX at 46 million. So they're kind of taking up number 2 and 3. I'm curious, Greg, you mentioned you pull a lot of your data from the folks over there at Deribit, and it's not hard to see why they have about 87% of current OI. Are you paying attention to some of the other smaller platforms out there now that are kind of fighting for second place, like LedgerX and OKEX as well, Greg?
Yeah, we've chatted with LedgerX. We keep an eye on them. Something that's interesting about LedgerX is it's kind of the venue for U.S. investors besides CME. So we think there's something interesting there. Although I'm kind of surprised that we're not seeing kind of a pickup volume on these U.S. Exchanges, just U.S. Centric exchanges, whether it's CME or LedgerX. The volume's still relatively small. Part of that, I think, is because a lot of the people trading some of these options are overseas, and because Deribit has kind of the most liquidity, everyone wants to go to the place with the most liquidity. So more liquidity begets more liquidity type of situation.
Yeah, you're right. It is kind of surprising about what's going on. I'm going to pick your brain on that in a second here. We had LedgerX on the show. We, of course, do a show every week with CME, so we've had them on many times here on the network. And in terms of what's going on the crypto front, kind of an interesting story there. Before we get to that really quickly here, let's look at the OI, where it's aggregated here right now. And as you said before, it seems to be the case yet again, even more firmly this week. People in the crypto option space like to play in the quarterlies. That's just kind of the way it shakes out. And right now, it's about 42,400 contracts open in that contract that's expiring in June, and that's over 2x what the next closest one is, which is the end of May contract with about 20,500. Then we see about 14,100 in May, mid-May, the 15th. So that's obviously some halving-driven paper, but it's all pretty much June. And like we saw in March, once March rolled off the board, everyone went out to June. I'm sure once June rolls off the board, it'll roll out to SEP. SEP already has 12,400 contracts in there. So for whatever reason, that reflects institutions or some other kind of mindset out there. Players like to play in the quarterlies in crypto options and Bitcoin options in particular. Again, not sure why that is, but that's where the OI lines up. By a strike breakdown right now, looks like 7,000 and 10,000 are still the hot strikes out here. So remember, I talked about resistance levels from a technical perspective before. That's not what we're seeing here in the options OI, though. In the options OI, it is still the round number strikes where everyone is playing. It's in the 7,000 strike, which is up to 10,200 contracts, as well as the 10,000 strike, which has about 8,400. So I guess a little bit of a bias to the puts. That reflects what we were just talking about earlier in the paper. Maybe that folks fading the trend, the direction coming out of the halving out here. They could also be selling those and looking for a pop. Either way, puts on the 7,000 strike, leading the dance right now by about, looks like almost 2,000 contracts. Coming into today's contract realm here, we've got the Bitcoin options. We're just talking about these, Greg, here. It's been an interesting story. CME obviously trumpeting their metrics, their analytics for what they've done from a volume perspective on the crypto front. They're talking about their Bitcoin futures. The ADV has reached about 8,500. That's up 43% from the same period last year. Options, they quote total volume here now, listeners. So that kind of shows how somewhat anemic it has been. The total volume is now 2,250 contracts. They did a record last week on the 6th. They did a record 216 contracts. Remember, I've been fighting for a while to get people to quote actual volume in the crypto space as opposed to ridiculous notional volume. Even CME is forced to do it when their volume is only 2,200 contracts. But if they can have more 200 contract days, maybe we'll see a little bit of a reversal of that trend. OI and the futures and the options hitting highs on May 7th of about nearly 10,000 contracts in the futures and 555 contracts in the options. That's actually pretty sizable for OI. And they also mentioned large open interest holders hitting a record of 62 during about a month ago, the week of April 14th. So a few nuggets out there on the CME Bitcoin front. Let's see what they're actually putting up from a numbers perspective. And they actually had a couple of decent days. Like you mentioned, the 220-odd contract day on the 6th. They did a total of just a tick under 10 million worth of notional that day, 9.9 million. On the 5th, the day before it, CME Bitcoin options also doing a decent amount of notional, about 9.4 million. On the futures front, a good volume today. So unlike what we saw on some of the other platforms like Deribit on the options where they're not really lighting it up today, the CME Bitcoin futures are lighting it up today to the tune of 18,000 contracts on the tape coming into showtime. On Friday, it was pretty light, about 7,700. Thursday was the other big day last week with about 13,400. Wednesday was about 7,000. The rest of the week was about 5,000 or less. So coming into today, big numbers. Other days of the week, not a ton. But let's go back to the options for a second, Greg. I know when CME launched the options, everyone was really paying attention because they thought this was the moment. You know, when they launched the future, every question everyone was asking was, when are we going to get the option? When are we going to get the options? A couple of years later, we finally got the options. They launched them. The futures were doing big numbers heading into the launch of the options. And yet, for whatever reason, we haven't seen the commensurate paper on the CME options side. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? Have you been as surprised as some of our other listeners that this is, you know, the 800-pound gorilla in the derivative space? They're the largest derivatives exchange on the planet. And yet, for whatever reason, folks aren't flocking to the CME. I mean, they're doing more now than they were, but folks aren't flocking into the CME contract with the same numbers that we're seeing on the Deribit. Does this surprise you? And if so, why do you think that is?
Yeah. I would say I'm definitely a little surprised. I think there's a couple reasons why it's like this. So the capital efficiency of a CME product is a lot less than a Deribit product. So if you're looking at the future, for example, the maintenance margin is a little bit higher than a regular future. It's about 33%, whereas on a Deribit future, it's about 1%. And so there's kind of that aspect to it. There's the other aspect where the sizing is different. It's a little bit bigger. So for a retail trader, not only do you have to use more capital, but then you're 5x whatever a Deribit option is. So that's kind of an element as well. I do think that the the fact that a lot of these option traders are overseas players plays in part on this phenomenon. So until some of the kind of institutional players come in and start trading these Bitcoin options, I do think that the kind of the Deribit or some of the crypto-centric exchanges will be more popular with the sort of retail and, mom and pop traders. So that's kind of an element of it. I also think that basically when I'm talking to some of our customers that are institutions or like prop firms starting to trade crypto options, their desks are still just getting into the game. So I do think that they have yet to start coming in and making markets on CME versus Deribit versus some of the other exchanges. I think there will be a flow of kind of mimicking some of the curves from, say, Deribit and applying them to CME. But I think they haven't gotten started yet. And the kind of last aspect is that a lot of these exchanges, let's say like TD Ameritrade, for example, you can't trade Bitcoin options. They have them, but you can't trade them. And so a lot of the other kind of retail platforms don't even have futures to begin with. So we think that the regular traditional market is still very cautious around Bitcoin. And because of that, they haven't really opened up the doors to some of these CME products for the regular retail investor that does want to trade them. So it's still a little bit locked out. So those are kind of some of the elements that we think are causing this low volume on CME so far.
The halving, as you said that, Greg, the halving is upon us. It has hit, and it seems like it is kind of like a little bit of an earnings announcement where the Bitcoin does not sure what to make of itself right now, but we have seen the mining rewards dropping for only the third time in the history of Bitcoin right now. So a somewhat historic event from that perspective. And it seemed like initial blush, they were fading it a little bit. It looks like Bitcoin dropped about 30 handles or so, and now back up almost to where it was. It was at about 85.56 when we were breaking it down earlier. It was at about 85.46 right now, so it's gained back about 20 of those points. But again, we're going to see probably a little bit of volatility, a little bit of vacillation in the near term as everyone kind of digests what we were digesting earlier in the show. Is what does this mean for the future after all this madness? Really quickly, we're talking futures. Let's round it out here with our old friend, the Backed volume bot. He was lighting it up on Backed, and short answer, not a heck of a lot like it was last week as well. They traded 2,235 contracts so far. That puts them down 22%. This is on their monthly future out there, which is, again, a one-to-one contract, so not the 5X contract that the CME was. Their all-time high was back on December 18th of last year when they traded 6,600 contracts. Not so much out there today. Open interest about 13.1 million. That's up actually 4%. So a little bit of a strong number out there from an OI perspective, but not so much from the overall volume out there. Let's see if we're seeing something similar in the altcoin realm. Yes, it is time to head into the Altcoin Universe.
It's time to move beyond Bitcoin and find out what's moving the rest of the crypto marketplace. It's time to boldly venture into the Altcoin Universe.
All right, really quickly, let's hit the top 10. I've said it before. This number take with a big grain of salt, especially right now because Bitcoin's moving around a little bit right now. So the overall valuations, I think you can take those with a bit of a grain of salt. The actual rankings, I think, are fairly reliable. Number one, of course, Bitcoin's at about 157 billion right now, but wait 5 minutes, that number will change. Let's put it here. Number two is, of course, ETH at about 184 and change. As of a few minutes ago, that puts it at about 20.4 billion. Number three, XRP, right about 8.4 billion. Number four, Tether, 6.3 billion. Number five, Bitcoin Cash, about 4.1 billion. Number six, Bitcoin SV, 3.4 billion. Number seven, Litecoin, hovering around that 2.6 billion level. Number eight, Binance Coin, 2.3 billion. Number nine, EOS, right about 2.2. And rounding out the top 10, Tezos, about 1.7 billion. Not a lot of change there, really, in the order or the rankings from our last show. So let's dive into what's going on the altcoin front. ETH coming into showtime was down about 21, almost 22 handles from last show. So they're not feeling, usually the presumption is that the rising tide kind of lifts all boats, and you think maybe leading into the halving you might see a general lifting across the altcoin universe. Not seeing that in the big number two out there from an overall ETH perspective. Again, down almost 22 handles from last show. Let's look at the Analytics, again, really quickly coming into showtime. We saw 30-day realized out in ETH down to about 93% from 106%, so coming in a little bit. 30-day implied moving in the other direction. Again, kind of similar to what we saw in Bitcoin, where it's up to about 101% from 95%. Not up a ton, but up a little bit. The ADV is up pretty strong. It was right around 2.3, almost 2.5 million last show. This week it's 3.7 million. So the volume looking pretty strong. Saw a couple of big spikes. Remember last show we saw the big spike was up to 11 million. We saw that a couple of times this week, both on the 8th and the 10th. Volume on Deribit hit about 11 million. Only about 4 million today. So a similar trajectory. We're not lighting it up today, but was lighting it up earlier this week. Skew, same deal. Looks like put's getting a bit of a boost up to about 10, almost 10.5% out there from about 1.6% last show. And the open interest up a little bit. It was about 52 million last show, closing in on 60 million this show. Greg, you kind of broke it down at the top of the show. You like watching yourself some ETH. It has been interesting to see now. I mean, Bitcoin halving aside, the upgrade, the evolution of Ether is another big kind of talking point in the crypto space. What are your thoughts on and anything you're seeing of interest out there in the ETH options and volatility space these days, sir?
Yeah. So ETH, again, I think ETH is really interesting from a kind of a crypto-centric perspective or fundamental perspective, whereas Bitcoin's kind of more of the macro perspective. So just kind of to give some background, if you look at, there's about 5,000 cryptos out there. The top 100 are about 93% of the market cap. Out of the top 100, over 80 of them are built on top of Ethereum. So Ethereum is kind of like this backbone layer that other people can build on top of. There was this report by Electric Capital in 2019 talking about the amount of developers on each different blockchain. And so if you look at Bitcoin, there's about 50, constant full-time contributing developers to the core protocol, but Ethereum is about 100. But then that excludes everyone who's building a ERC token on top of Ethereum. So Ethereum has a lot of the development brain power behind it, whether it's directly on the core protocol or the coins built on top of it, or some of the NFT assets which are digital assets, non-fungible. So we think that this ball event that's going to occur with the Beacon Chain launch will be something that will either allow Ethereum to finally kind of get a leg up again and sort of catch up to the Bitcoin price appreciation, or could go completely the other way if it was some sort of big flop or keeps getting delayed forever. So we think the vol opportunity is there, really kind of the calendars of June versus September or June versus December, long of those calendars, long those diagonals.
Calendars and diagonals in ETH. I like it. I could talk more ETH. We got to get some of the other altcoin and get some of the listeners on for their questions as well. Really quickly, Ripple, XRP, another one you guys like. Not feeling the love this week. Again, kind of the downtrend across most of the leading altcoin this week. Off nearly 3 cents, about 2.7 cents. So no longer is it north of the 20-cent level like it was last week. Bitcoin Cash down about 22.5 handles from last show, and Bitcoin XV down nearly 28 handles from last show. So the Bitcoin tide is lowering all boats right now, as opposed to, let's just see where Bitcoin is right now, by the way. Speaking of Bitcoin, wait a few minutes post-halving, and it's going to move quite a bit. It's at about 87.20 right now, so now it's back up after having kind of surrendered and coming into showtime was at about the 85 or so 70 level, got down to about 85.40, then got down to 85.09, and now back up to 87.20 or so. So all over the place, we're seeing a little bit of vol, as you would expect. As we head on into what you guys are seeing, it is time for your crypto questions.
You've got questions about crypto. Who doesn't? It's time to find out the answers to your crypto questions.
All right, welcome to the crypto questions. You guys ask us questions. Sometimes we turn the tables on you. Let's get a bit of an update on what you guys are feeling right now. Coming out of this halving, a lot of thoughts for folks out here. You know what? It's still pretty neck and neck for our audience, what they're feeling right now. Maybe some of the recent price action is impacting this, because actually it's ticked slightly the other way. It was slightly bullish before. Now it's slightly bearish, about 51.1% on the bearish side, 48.9% on the bullish side, but still effectively 50-50, effectively a coin flip, which again shows kind of just how much of a question mark this halving is. What does it mean going forward? That's the big question. This poll still going to be live for a little while after the show, so if you're listening after the fact on the podcast, you can still get out there and vote. At Options is the place to go. A lot of folks chiming in like Kenner. I won't even attempt to say his handle here. A lot of consonants here. But Kenner chiming in, listening to the show, voting on our poll, saying, as long as crypto represents a threat to central bank currencies, and he puts in parentheses here, control, it will never be allowed to flourish. So it sounds like Kenner is coming in on the bearish side of this poll. He thinks the folks controlling the fiat out there, a.k.a. the central banks, going to come in against the crypto, kind of perhaps threatening their monopoly on the systems, and they're not going to like that. They're going to squeeze it to death. So he's feeling a little bit on the bearish side. Again, let us know what you guys think. A lot of you have already. It's very tight. So if your vote could nudge it one way or the other. So get in there right now. Nick asking us, what are the options telling us for the post-halving Bitcoin movement? Well, we kind of just broke it down. Puts getting bid. Puts getting juicy out there. Looking at the skew, looking at the open interest. The puts are where the action is right now. In fact, Greg was just breaking it down for us. They're telling clients that risk reversals out there, particularly bullish ones, sell and put, buy and call, pretty favorable with the puts this bid. So I guess, Greg, is that still your takeaway here? You're liking yourself some bullish risk reversal? And anything else you want to share with Nick and our other listeners in terms of what the options are telling us for the outlook going forward after the halving, sir?
Yeah, I still like these medium-term, short-term, medium-term, 30 days, 60 days. Long-term, I think the volatility, so if I'm looking at the volatility tone for the past 3 years, for like the 6 months to 1 year, for Bitcoin, it's about an 80 realized vol. And so the December options are trading about 85. I kind of like some 1x2s, long to 2, short to 1, around 80 if you can get it. You could get it on Friday after this weekend. It got bid a little bit, but I think those are pretty interesting for kind of long haul. So that's my opinion.
All right, let's see what other themes our listeners have for us here. Moore says, maybe he's the inventor of the law. Maybe this is Moore's law here. Chiming in, hi. Well, hello, Moore. Great program. Well, thank you. He says, learning a lot about Bitcoin as I am more of an options guy and just getting my feet wet in crypto. What will the halving do to Bitcoin? Well, first, thank you, Moore, and everyone else who's joined this show and discovered it recently and are learning about the whole network. We've seen a huge flood of you guys. So if you're coming from the crypto side, there's a lot more for you guys to discover on the full network side. Unfortunately, this is the only crypto options-oriented program on the network. In fact, I do believe it's the only one in existence. So we're kind of the only game in town when it comes to that front. But on the other side of the network, there's other content. If you like talking about the volatility and the skew and all these things we're breaking down here, we do that on a lot more traditional asset classes on our other programs. So be sure to check those out. What will halving do to Bitcoin? Well, we kind of just broke that down. That's the $1 million question out there right now. The marketplace itself is still debating that right now, a.k.a. the price of Bitcoin is still fluctuating pretty aggressively. It seems like it's maybe settled out a little bit now, right around the low 8,700s, 8,720, which will mean it's maybe that's where it's settling out, which is kind of almost unched from where it was at the beginning of the show, which is kind of interesting. A lot of folks expected maybe a lot more swings, but again, the halving is kind of just happening and just happened, so maybe we still are going to see another wave of movement out there as a result. More comments here from more love, actually. JLL56, great show. Keep them coming. Well, thank you, JLL, and everyone else out there who's feeling the love. We love you guys more, if that's possible. You guys are the reason we do this show out here and keep it coming for you every week. So glad you guys are enjoying it. Tim Stewart chiming in saying, thanks for producing this show for over a year with the best guests in the world of crypto options. You guys are the OGs of this market. Many thanks. Well, I don't know about that. We've only been doing it for about a year and change, so I don't know if that makes us the OGs of it. We are, like I said before, kind of the only game in town when it comes to parsing this stuff. So if you like that, I guess from that perspective, I guess we are, because we kind of got that ball rolling. So maybe I guess we will take that on that front, but others have certainly been playing in the crypto realm for longer than us. But when it comes to the option side, maybe, I guess we'll take that. We're slow to accept your praise here on the network, but we'll take that one, I guess, Tim. Thank you, Tim and JLL56 and everyone else who's been enjoying the program out there. I just like this handle, Buddha Boy. Buddha Boy wants to know, do we have any thoughts on Dogecoin? You know, that's one of the ones we've seen thrown out there a few times. We don't really parse it too much here on the show. I don't know, Greg, is this an altcoin you guys pay attention to out there, the Dogecoin?
This is not a coin that I personally find super interesting. It's one that I've always kind of benchmarked as a good coin should be worth at least as much as Dogecoin as far as market cap goes. Dogecoin has 0 developers on it. The last time I had checked, maybe that's changed a little bit, but we think that it's kind of a stale coin with not a lot of kind of prospects going forward.
Yeah, it hasn't been my favorite either, and hasn't really, just looking at the listener interest, we haven't gotten a ton of inquiries about it, probably because it's not really very options-centric right now, so that's probably a part of it. So I guess short answer to your question, Buddha Boy, is no. Not a lot going on from an options perspective, so it hasn't really seen a lot of interest, unfortunately, in Dogecoin. But maybe you'll be the canary in the coal mine there. You'll be the one who signals, the harbinger of what's to come here, a flood of interest in Dogecoin. If that's the case, we'll be certain to get you updated. By the way, we're actually up about 200 handles in Bitcoin at about an 87.56 right now. Puts it up almost exactly 200 handles from where it was there at the top of the show when we were coming in at about 85.76 out there. So a little bit of love out there for the halving. We'll see if that can hold course into next week's show. Unfortunately, speaking of next week's show, that music means we've come up to get it. Man, how an hour flies when you're having fun in the crypto space. I want to thank Greg here for joining me. Greg, you were an able guest. You survived the entire show in the hot seat. I know it can't be the most comfortable of seats sometimes, so well done, sir. So, Greg, if you want to leave our listeners with any hints, any teases from what's coming down the pike from you guys and the team over there at Genesis Volatility, now is the time. The floor is yours. And also, if folks want to kick the tires and maybe sign up for your newsletter or sign up for a beta of your platform, where should they go? What should they do?
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Mark. I really appreciate it. Our Twitter handle is at GenesisVol. We have a newsletter. It's genesisvolatility.substack.com. And our platform website is genesisvolatility.io. Right now, the platform is invite only, but it will have some of the free stuff out pretty soon. And if you are on the Paradigm platform, you will be able to sign up for the beta.
I know, Greg. I'm going to have to scam one of those invites for you so I can play around with the tools and kick the tires for myself out there. So I like myself a little bit of crypto options analytics. You may have heard. We do a show about it every week, so interesting stuff out there. I'll check it out for myself. Genesis Volatility. Keep an eye out for it, listeners. Maybe you can score one of those coveted invites for yourself, and we'll keep an eye on it as the platform unfolds and becomes available to more of you out there. And on behalf of Greg and indeed myself, I want to thank all of you out there for downloading, streaming, subscribing, for listening live, for voting in our polls, for sending in your comments and questions, for all the fun stuff that you guys do, particularly on this crazy halving day. A lot going on out there. I'm sure there's going to be a lot to talk about next week. We got a great guest. I think the folks from Gemini will be joining us next week, so a lot of great guests in store for you. For everyone out there who's enjoying this program, keep it up. Share it with your friends. A lot of people need more in-depth financial content these days. Everyone's stuck at home, a little bit worried. Certainly on the crypto space, that's the case. So share it with your friends. Keep the votes, keep the comments, keep the reviews on the platforms you listen to it coming. And we'll see you back here next week for more of the Crypto Rundown.
You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.